Welcome to you all. I'm Andrew Chung, Artistic Director of INNErchamber, and this is INNErchamber Connections. It's a chance to speak with our guest artists and our special guests, our guest composers for our concert ahead. And today I've got with me Kevin Lau. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, nice to be here.
And we're performing Kevin's String Quartet number 3 as part of this program. And I've also got Ben Bolt Martin on the video. Hey, Ben.
Hi.
So I'm going to embarrass Kevin a little bit. I'm just going to read a little bit of his bio just for context, how amazing he is. So Kevin Lau has been commissioned by some of Canada's most prominent artists and ensembles, and his work has been performed internationally in the US, France, Denmark, Germany, Austria, and the Czech Republic. A prolific composer of orchestral, chamber, ballet, opera, and film music, he was the youngest person to be appointed affiliate composer of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra in 2012. Shortly after, he was commissioned to write 2 ballets with choreographer Guillaume Cote, a full-length ballet, Le Petit Prince, for the National Ballet of Canada, and a half-hour ballet, Dark Angels, for the National Arts Centre Orchestra. He has been composer in residence for the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra since 2001. Wow, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So let's dive right in. So we're doing string quartet number 3 of yours, of which there are now 4 string quartets that you've done. Is that right?
Yep, that sounds right.
Very cool. When did this one take place? When did you compose it?
I think this was I think the project started with the Affiar Quartet and Scratch Bastard, who's the DJ, in 2014. I keep thinking 2015 because that was actually when the premiere happened, but the gestation of the process was a little bit longer than that. So 2014, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what we are playing is just the straight up, string quartet version. But I guess what teased out this project a bit longer for you was that you did involve this DJ. Tell us a little bit more about that. Was that the original concept, or was this an add-on kind of feature?
Yeah, it was really the idea of Adrian Fung, who's the cellist of the former cellist of the Affiar Quartet, and he had this idea of creating an album of original string quartets that could then be remixed by his friend Scratch Bastard. Paul Murphy is his name, and then we would go back into the process and then remix the remix. So we would create a string quartet version based on the remix that Scratch Bastard created. And there was actually, so we called it a 3-stage process. There was like the first stage, which was the acoustic piece, the second stage, which was the DJ remix, the third, which was the combination of the two. But for me, there was actually a fourth stage, which was that the TSO commissioned a piece for string quartet, orchestra, and DJ based on this quartet. And so I ended up actually writing a concerto grosso for string quartet and turntables and orchestra based on all of this material. So it was a really, really crazy, a really crazy ride.
So was that then kind of a 3-year ride from beginning to completion to that TSO?
Yeah, 3 year, 2.5 years, something like that. Because I think the culmination of it was March 2016. I think the full concerto version.
Right. And so Adrian and you already knew each other, or you friends from way back, or how did that?
I think we knew each other already, but I can't really. We got closer after the project. I can't really remember.
Yeah.
But I think we had known each other through school, and his wife Min I knew as well from U of T.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so somehow he knew you as the guy who would take on this crazy project, mixing genres. And I've heard a little bit of the remix, like a kind of a 2-minute clip or something, and it was amazing. It was really, really lots of fun. Maybe that's for a future concert of ours. We'll bring it back.
Yeah, and it's again, a process and a project that I had no prior experience with. I'd never worked with a DJ before. So there was a certain kind of ground level experimentation and a kind of exploration and a sense of play, I think, that you can probably hear in the music, and you know, you guys are working on it, which is awesome. But that sense of play was very, very different, I think, for me, than some of the earlier quartets I'd written, which were more along the lines of me as a student trying to prove myself and trying to wrestle with the historical baggage of the string quartet, which can be a very heavy medium. And so I was writing these very, very heavy string quartets. And for this piece, I wanted to do something that was totally, totally different than that.
Well, that's neat. It
I
is
just jumped
such.
in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I mean, it's really. I mean, I've heard and played your pieces in a number of different places, and it seems to me that there's always these references to the electronic world and the sort of rock world, and yet you're stuck. You've stuck with the sort of straight up Western performance practices in a lot of ways, and made things really incredibly fresh with them, which is really cool. Is that something you're intentionally sticking to as just, you know, this is how you want to express those really cool edgy, playful ideas, that you want to keep it in the sort of Western performance practice? Is that something that you've done intentionally?
I mean, part of it is, for me, I think, a balancing act between what I know my comfort zone is and what my strengths are. I mean, I was reared in that tradition of writing for string players and pianists and chamber ensembles and orchestras, and I love that tradition. It's something that's very, very dear to me, and so writing with facility comes, I wouldn't say easily, but it's a thing that I kind of know how to do when I'm approaching it. But at the same time, you know, when growing up, I listened to all sorts of music, and there are all sorts of things that are part of my musical DNA, I guess, in terms of like when I imagine things, what's informing that imagination. And so, and you know, there was a time where I think I was really concerned about that, because maybe it was less encouraged. Like, you were, as composers, there was a whole time period, probably before my time more so, but where, you know, you just had to be original at the expense of everything else. You had to forge your own path, and sometimes that meant shutting doors to all sorts of things. And that was, I found that to be kind of a limiting thing after a while, because I realized that that's not really how, at least for me, it was not really how I wanted to operate. I feel like to be authentic is to respond to your own, the diversity of influences that are part of your memory, right? And so this piece was in some ways kind of like a real palate cleanser in that way, because I was like, you know what, I'm just going to lean in to whatever I feel like doing, and whoever I am in that process will come out of it, and will manifest itself, and I'm just not going to like worry about it so much, which sounds easy to say now, but of course I worried a lot about those things back then.
Well, it seemed like a pretty important piece then, and that whole you know, realization, and just respecting your own exploration, where you want to go and forge your own way.
Yeah, and you know, I've come into contact with these kinds of things on different levels in different pieces. But I do remember in this piece, you know, we had explicit permission to go there because we were working with the DJ. It was already a kind of like hyper postmodern thing, and I was like, oh, you know, why not get a little bit poppy and throw in some heavy metal in there? Like, there's no reason. I love, by the way, the title of your concert, Flow, like the concept of it. Because I have always been obsessed with that idea of flow, and not just like the psychological state of flow, which I love, but also the idea of moving from one idea to another in a piece of music, from point A to point B. And what are the boundary conditions of that? Like, what is acceptable to do from point A to point B? Could you begin in, say, the Baroque and end in heavy metal? Like, is that, why not? It doesn't seem like there's any real deep reason why we can't do that, other than trying to make a case of it, trying to make a case of two different things coexisting.
And so this music, it's in two movements, and the first movement is gliding, and then the second movement is winds of change. So in the gliding, you've got this elements of the Renaissance or Baroque, and then you know you've got these amazing licks for, especially for the cello, and the way it opens. It's awesome. Some great first violin licks that I get to play. I guess that's the heavy metal influence. Electric guitar, my best interpretation. So yeah, I hear that. But amongst all of that, you've chosen some pretty funky time signatures. You know, I got to take you to task for this. But I'm really curious. We've had a lot of fun putting it together. It's incredibly rewarding to play once it all syncs up, and we're all thinking, you know, there's a lot of 5/8. There's a lot of 5/8 to 6/8 to 2/4 to, you know, to whatever. How did you come across, like, how did you land on that? How do you make those decisions for time signatures?
Well, first, because we have this face-to-face opportunity, I do want to apologize for throwing in too many odd signatures. I'm sure that as a person who doesn't have to put it together, you know, it's very easy for me to put those meters on the page, and you guys actually have to do them. So sorry about that. I'm glad that it's rewarding in the end, though.
It is very much.
You know, I think it's two things. I think the first thing for me is that you know, meter can have so many refreshing dimensions to it, and you don't really have to go even farther than Bartok to see just that the rhythms of things can don't. It's not really the meter for me that comes first so much as the rhythm, and then the meter becomes a way of organizing it. And so if I imagine a certain rhythm to have this kind of lilt to it, you know, bum 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 bum, like the interchange between 2 and 3 can be very, very malleable and very flexible. And then the meter is actually the inconvenient part of it, which is just I have to find some way of actually notating this so that it all fits. So there's one part of it that's just kind of like the flexibility of it. And then the other one, which you can probably guess already, is that in progressive metal, for example, there's just so many meter changes. And as a listener, as a very casual listener, I should add, of groups like Dream Theater, and you know, like it sort of fascinates me, these rhythmic grooves that kind of, it's like the normal thing to do would have been to have that in 4, but then you've subtracted a 16th at the end or something like that. And so I just have that in my bloodstream somewhere, and I wanted to find a way of doing that. So
that's neat. So and they probably, well, I don't really know how progressive metal groups rehearse or work on their music, but it's probably not written out on a score like this.
yeah, I mean, in the case of those guys, like for Dream Theater, as one of many examples, I mean, 3 of them are like Juilliard trained musicians who just happen to be like much more into metal and rock than their classical stuff, and so yeah, they probably don't write it up, but they have that kind of discipline, and I think they just kind of memorize these rhythms and play together and constantly rehearse it. It's pretty mind blowing, actually.
Wow, that's amazing. And then the Renaissance stuff, like how did you choose that? Like, is this a modification on a La Folia, or like is it your own kind of, what is it?
It's probably me drawing upon a memory of somebody else channeling the Renaissance. So I'm like the very opposite of a composer who goes to a primary source for research and does everything in a very authentic way. I'm almost kind of like gleefully inauthentic about everything I do, because I kind of feel like that's the way music evolves. Is that there's never a faithfulness to it, and everything gets sort of distorted. And so for me, I was not really listening to anything like it was just the idea of the Renaissance. Yeah, it's more like the idea of the Renaissance and somehow feeling like it was the right place to go into.
Mhm.
And why it kind of follows from this very like almost Crouching Tiger-esque opening, you know, I don't know. It just felt to me like sometimes the response, the musical response to a musical event, doesn't have to make sense on paper, but if it feels like the right thing to do, it's the right place to go. That's kind of like the way I think of it. So
Wow, that's great. And so you're not really ascribing to any form per se. You're kind of creating almost are you creating storyline, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think in this case it was not very narratively driven, at least for me. I mean, I've because I'm also very influenced by film music. I think that part of that language has a narrative dimension to it that people can hear and feel.
Mhm.
But in this particular case, I wasn't thinking of like a concrete story or anything. I'm curious if you had something in mind when you were playing this first movement. Um, for me, the first movement was maybe a bit more of a spontaneous form, and then I think the second one has a little bit more of a tight kind of structure to it, with a contrasting middle section and then some outer sections that are reprises of that you know bum 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 ba da 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 bum, bum.
Yeah,
So yeah, yeah, the form kind of fits with the material, I guess.
neat,
Yeah, I
neat.
was wondering. I mean, I was kind of wondering about the what was the nugget, or like you said you start with rhythm, like you imagine rhythm first as a rule, or are you normally just singing tunes, or what is your sort of nugget when you begin a process like that, like especially that first movement? I mean, obviously with that, I mean, we should spend some time talking about the most important part, which is the big cello solo. But yeah, I mean, it's obvious, it's very clearly got that heavy metal. I actually sort of imagine myself in a sort of uh, Big Sugar kind of place when I'm doing that stuff. Just
Mm,
the heavy growly kind of guitar, low guitar
yeah,
type stuff, and
yeah.
that kind of thing like that. Is that something? Did you begin with a groove in mind, or did you begin with the tune, or did you just kind of fiddle around with something that came out that sounded awesome, or what's sort of your nugget to begin with that?
Yeah, I mean, these are very good questions. I it's there's a mystery to it. I don't know. It's hard to put my finger on it. I think, to be honest, the very very first thing is a vision of the piece, like a kind of feeling for the
Hmm.
entire piece of what is it, what am I trying to accomplish? Not necessarily in explicit terms, but just like what am I feeling for this piece? What kind of piece is it?
Hmm.
And I mentioned some of those things to you already. The idea of something playful, something that wears its influences very gleefully on its sleeve,
Hmm.
and then from that point on, I start to build little moments, I think. And some of those can be rhythmic. Like I think I honestly don't remember how the cello solo began in the beginning, but I feel like this main, and you don't have to take this to heart at all when you're performing, but I think part of it was just the experience of hearing Yo-Yo Ma on that Crouching Tiger soundtrack,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
that kind of like really really flexible, playful yet serious at the same time. I don't know, like there's something about the vocal, and it's almost kind of like a vocal thing, right? So there was part of that imagery in my mind. With the second movement, it's a little bit interesting because that tune, I had actually, this was not the first piece where I had used that tune. It had emerged somewhere else in a different piece. But this was the piece where I felt like the tune kind of um, emerges fully, I suppose. And I liked it enough that I felt like I needed to repurpose it for this piece.
It works great, really great.
Mhm.
Um, and when you're composing, so do you compose at the piano, or do you compose, on a string instrument? How do you do this?
Yeah, I used to compose more on the piano. I actually, pre-pandemic, I would actually go to coffee shops and I would take a stack of staff paper, and I would actually go and I would write ideas on staff paper, with and I at first this was very very difficult. I mean, it's hard to imagine music in your head. I don't do it perfectly or all that successfully, but when I do get it, there's kind of like a freedom in that. And when I sketch, it's a non-committal flow process. So the non-committal part is important because I only get into that state of like I can do anything and I can just like chase an idea down to its conclusion if I feel like I don't have to, it's almost like an improvisation. I don't have to commit to it. It's just an idea that's coming forth. And so, 80%, 90% of what I come up with during those sessions is discardable. It's just not stuff that I'm going to use, or I'll save it for something else. But once in a while, I'll come up with something that is like, oh yeah, you know what, this theme here, this melodic idea, or this harmonic progression, or this rhythm, or this texture that I can't even, sometimes I'm not writing notes at all. I'm just writing like blobs or putting words underneath and just trying to describe an idea because it's so hard for me to actually notate it. And sometimes they make their ways into the piece. So that's my initial process. Eventually, once I feel comfortable enough with the idea, and I feel like I gotta get going. It's been baked in the oven, so to speak. Then I go into my notation program, Sibelius, and I start writing it. So it's a little bit like if you're a novelist, you come up with the ideas. You can't really, I know there's some people who do this, but most people have a preconceived idea of what they want to do before starting on page one. So it's like that with me, but then you have to type out the paragraphs and the sentences
Right.
and chapters and so forth. And that's the Sibelius process for me.
Right. And you're writing for at that stage, you're writing for a particular purpose. You're not just sketching for the purpose of imaginative, like every Monday you sketch, like you're writing for the commission, or you're writing for the purpose.
Yeah. Once I'm in Sibelius, then it's all business. And hopefully I have enough of like a blueprint in my mind that I know what I'm doing. But I to be honest with you, half the time I get stuck at around the 3-minute, 4-minute mark for like a 15-minute piece, because the music wants to do a certain thing, and I might have a preconceived idea of where I want it to go. But as I'm writing it and I'm listening back to what I'm writing, I'm like, oh, you know what, that could be a place I could go. And so, your intuition at the moment is fighting with your intuition at a different moment when you're coming up with ideas. And so solving that is sometimes actually not that fun.
Yeah.
It can be very frustrating, but
Right.
yeah.
And so one last question for you. What direction do you want to take your musical exploration going forward the next couple of years? Like where are you right now, and where are you interested in going?
Yeah, that's not the easiest question for me to answer, honestly, because sometimes I'll be very frank. I mean, like I've been really, really grateful for the opportunities that have come my way, and a lot of the experimentation that I've done in my music has been a result of other people's ideas and other people's projects, and then them bringing me on board and me trying to figure out a way of doing it. So I've been very, very grateful to all of the people and all of the people, like, you guys are playing my piece, which is awesome, to have actually made that happen. And I'm one of those people that I kind of chase the opportunities as they come. I don't try too much to impose a new vision of what I'm trying to do, mostly because it kind of emerges. Like, I feel like I'm a different composer than I was 15 years ago, but not necessarily because of anything that I've thought of or done purposely. It's just something that has kind of come out.
Opportunities are probably presenting them in a different way. And are you at the stage of your career now where you feel like you can, maybe you have something that you've been milling about in the back of your mind, and then you can apply it to a particular circumstance or a particular opportunity?
Yeah, a little bit more so. I mean, I think 2019 was, no, a little bit earlier. 2018, I think, was the first year where I started to write music for myself again, which is, of course, how we all start writing music.
Mm-hmm.
You're just doing it. You have no idea that there's even such a thing as a career in composition. But I actually had to revisit the premise of writing music for my own soul, so to speak. And that was actually a really, really big step for me, because for a while I had started to get into the rhythm of only doing things when I was asked to do something, and I found that I had things to say that were not commission based. So I don't know. I think in the future there are certain kinds of there are just certain ensembles that I haven't written for. Like I haven't done a lot of vocal music, and that's something that I'm interested in. And Ben, to your point, there are things beyond the Western tradition that I am kind of tangentially interested in as well. I always have to move very, very slowly for fear of being totally overwhelmed by something that I don't understand. But for example, even the practice of writing for an instrument like the erhu, which I did very recently, which I don't know anything about, has been very, very interesting. So I want to do more of that for sure.
Very cool. Well, that's time. Thanks so much for joining me today, Kevin and Ben.
Thanks,
Thank
Kevin.
you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I've enjoyed our chat very much, and I'm really looking forward to this concert. So this concert is called Flow. It's on March the 6th. We're live streaming it. This is live and in person from Revival House back to in-person concerts, thank goodness. And tickets are available on our website, www.innerchamber.ca. Thanks to you both.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a great concert.